स्वागत है।
Hello and welcome, I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel says nearly 100 trucks entered Gaza, but locals report flour shortages as bakeries remain shut. Critics warn Israel risks global isolation with pressure mounting over an 11-week blockade that's pushed Gaza to the brink of famine. Israeli troops fire warning shots after diplomats deviate from an approved route in Jenin, sparking international outrage. Spain, Italy and Belgium condemn the incident, with EU officials demanding a full investigation and accountability. A Russian missile hits a Ukrainian training site in Sumy, killing 6 and wounding 10 during a live training exercise. Moscow claims dozens more died, while Putin tours nearby Kursk as Kiev launches a probe and suspends the unit commander. Moscow rejects claims it's delaying peace, saying a ceasefire plan is coming, but offers no timeline. The Kremlin insists everyone is working dynamically, yet Putin's terms from the Istanbul talks remain under wraps. Ottawa confirms talks with Washington over joining Trump's $25 billion Golden Dome defense plan. Experts question the system's scope and costs as deals on Canada's role and funding remain unclear. Pakistan announces plans to expand trade and investment with China just days after a deadly clash with India. The May the 10th ceasefire ended the worst fighting in decades as Beijing calls for peace through dialogue. 5 adolescents are arrested in Germany for forming a far-right terror cell linked to arson and attempted murder. Prosecutors say the group called itself the Last Wave of Defense and targeted migrants and community centers. Chris Brown posts £5 billion bail after being charged with a violent nightclub assault in London. Prosecutors say he hit a producer with a tequila bottle in an unprovoked attack. His tour is now cleared to go ahead. Our top story today, US President Donald Trump has announced new details and initial funding for his Golden Dome missile shield system. Trump has embarked $25 billion for the project, which he said could eventually cost a total of around $175 billion and would be operational in about 3 years. Here's what the US President said.
Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term. So we'll have it done in about 3 years. Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space. I'm also pleased to report that the One Big Beautiful Bill will include $25 billion for the Golden Dome to help construction get underway. That's the initial sort of a down deposit. And we have probably, you're talking about, General, we're talking about $175 billion total cost of this when it's completed.
Meanwhile, China has accused Washington of undermining global stability. Beijing has denounced the Golden Dome as a threat to international security and accused the United States of fueling an arms race. Here's what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said.
本国优先，执迷于谋求自身绝对安全，违反各国安全不受减损的原则，损害全球的战略平衡与稳定。中方对此严重关切。我们敦促美方尽早放弃发展和部署全球反导系统，以实际行动增进大国战略互信，维护全球战略稳定。
On the other hand, the Kremlin has said that Donald Trump's plan for a Golden Dome missile shield requires consultation with Russia, but was otherwise a sovereign matter for the United States, softening its tone after previously slamming the idea as destabilizing. Peskov's comments came 2 days after a call between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin that the US leader said went very well. The proposal, which Trump ordered a week after his inauguration in January, would see Washington deploy missile interceptors in space to protect against ballistic and hypersonic threats. Trump has said that the US Space Force General Michael Gutlin will lead on this, and that Canada has expressed interest in being a part of it as they want to have protection also. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, speaking alongside Trump, said the system is aimed at protecting the homeland from cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, drones, whether they're conventional or nuclear. We're now joined by our guest today, Cliff Smith, who is the National Security and Government Affairs professional located in Washington, USA. Thank you very much, Cliff, for joining us. This is another seemingly large proposition from the US president, and it, of course, is gold. What's the idea behind this new Golden Dome? And obviously, we know that the US is very politically divided. We have seen interest from Canada in this, but how, you join us from Washington, how is the US reacting to this announcement throughout the political spectrum?
Well, I mean, the idea of missile defense is not a new one. I mean, it goes back to the 1980s, and the U.S. has developed different capabilities and shared them with their allies at different times for a very long time. This particular proposal, the Trump administration has a different method of many other administrations. It tends to go sort of with a big press release about an executive order on a topic that may or may not be, for lack of a better term, fully cooked or fully, bought into by the necessary players, and then try to get them to sort of go along after they made the announcement and sort of get what they can. It's sort of a headline first, details later method of doing things. I sort of see this as the same way. I mean, frankly, the Chinese reaction to the announcement perhaps gives credence to why it is necessary. I mean, this goes back to an old Cold War thing where the Russians would always denounce missile defense as provocative, even though it is by inherently a defensive measure, which I think goes a long ways to explaining Chinese intentions and Chinese views of the world at this particular time, which is unfortunate. Nonetheless, I would wait, I suppose, to see how these kinds of things shake out, because the kinds of things that he's talking about are things that take years, and my guess is that 3 years with at best a minimum amount of congressional buy-in at this point, and let alone bipartisan buy-in, it's going to take time for this to play out. I wouldn't take it at face value that's going to work out just as the administration says. That said, I do think it is basically a good issue for them. I do think it is basically something that probably most national security hawks and of any stripe are going to be at least favorably disposed to, at least hearing things about, and it could develop into something very real. I just wouldn't take that quite at face value right away.
Yes, and obviously the things most in contention is the speed which Donald Trump says he was going to get this done. He said it would be done in the next 3 years. Also, the cost of an initial $25 billion. Do you think that's warranted? Do you think the US is facing enough threats to warrant a defense system like this, a world first, 400 times the size of Israel's Iron Dome?
Yeah, I mean that's the question, the $1 million question, or the perhaps multi-billion-dollar question, I suppose. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I do think that missile defense has long-term benefits to deter adversaries that are good. Whether or not that the kind of price tag he's looking at, the sort of focus he's looking at, is worth it in light of other threats from from terrorism to AI to the war in Ukraine to in Europe, stability and other things that are priorities. That's a good question, and those are the kinds of questions that I feel like under a more normal administration in America, you'd already have sort of discussions about beforehand, and those are the kinds of discussions I'm not sure we've had yet. Which is why I'm saying I think we might have to wait to sort of see how this really develops in practice. But I think those are the kinds of things you're going to want to think about, and my guess is those things are going to be sort of litigated or discussed in the political sphere, more specifically, in the coming months, and we'll see how that plays out.
And Cliff, we have talked about China briefly, but do you think a system would like this would make nuclear powers like Russia or China more aggressive or more cautious?
I'm more cautious. They can say it's going to make them more aggressive all day long. I don't think it's true. They clearly see anything that would diminish their ability to strike first as a threat, which I think again tells you something about their mindset, which I think is unfortunate. So in a sense, they do see it as a threat. At the same time, I don't think either Putin or the others in the Kremlin or those in Beijing are at least, particularly this time anyway, are so reckless that they would do some kind of first strike before it would come online. So barring that, which I don't think is realistic, I would think it would make them much more cautious, because the only reason you take sort of offensive action is if you think it's going to gain you something. If you think it's going to fall flat, you'll never do it. So I think it would make them more cautious.
Cliff Smith, thank you for the insight. You are staying with us. We now move on. In a tense new chapter of the ongoing US-China trade dispute, tempers are flaring over Beijing's most advanced homegrown semiconductors, just days after the two countries reached a temporary truce on tariffs. This week, China criticized the US for warning companies against using Huawei-made AI chips, accusing the Trump administration of undermining a recent trade consensus reached in Geneva. Both nations had agreed to ease the tariffs temporarily and work towards a broader deal within 90 days. The issue centers on Huawei's Ascent chips, advanced AI processors challenging NVIDIA's dominance. These chips are key to China's AI growth and reducing reliance on foreign tech. In response to the Trump administration's announcement lifting Biden-era chip restrictions, China accused the US of unilateral bullying and using export controls to suppress China. The US warned that using Huawei's Ascend chips could violate the export laws, but later clarified its language. Despite this, China now threatens legal action against businesses aiding US efforts to ban advanced Chinese chips under its anti-foreign sanctions law. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang revealed the company had to write off billions in inventory due to US export restrictions. He also warned that China's $50 billion market is a significant missed opportunity and criticized the US government's export controls, saying they may actually help China accelerate its own AI development. However, NVIDIA celebrated a win this week with a strategic partnership in Saudi Arabia to build AI factories, signaling a shift in US policy towards a more open stance on technology exports. We're now joined by Andrew K.P. Lung, China strategist located in Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew, on the program as always. I want to know about this Huawei Ascend chip and why it's causing so much alarm in Washington right now.
Well, of course, the sanctions on China and the restrictions on China's access to high-end semiconductor chips is the keystone of America's anti-China policy, trying to contain China's rise technologically and also militarily, of course. Going back to the times with Huawei, with the arrest of the chief technology officer, and also sanctioning Huawei left, right, and center, only to see Huawei emerge from it all, not being not facing a collapse, but also finding additional avenues and growing its strength, because Huawei has been embedded in the world's 5G infrastructure all over the place. Now, as far as the high-end semiconductors, all talks are on the 9 nano chips of 3 nanometers and smaller. I mean, these are very, very tiny. So 1 nanometer is a 1 millionth of the breadth of a human hair. But what is significant is that one of the China's major iPhone conglomerates, Xiaomi, only a couple of days ago reviewed launch of its latest phone using a 3 nanometer self-developed chips. This suggests that China's really is reaping benefits from its its emphasis on self-reliance, even since Trump 1.0. China is not actually out of the woods yet, but it's getting there very, very rapidly. And also the bottleneck of the lithography machines controlled by the world's only one company capable of doing it, the ASML in Netherlands, is using this kind of ultraviolet rays technology, whereas the latest development in China, they're finding another way which is not depending on this ultraviolet rays, but able to again produce chips with comparable, if not even more superior functions. So I think that technology is not a one single barrier. I think that the whole country, whole China, is all of society efforts to enhance its own self-reliance technology. And we are seeing a number of breakthroughs already, as I mentioned, Xiaomi and also Huawei. But I think that the technological war, semiconductor war, is not going to end, as in the case of, you just mentioned, missiles, high-end missile defense, because the two superpowers are now pitching against one another for dominance in various domains.
Andrew, there's no doubt of China's power when it comes to technology and technological manufacturing, but from Beijing's view, is this chip tension just another tool in a broader tech containment effort by the US?
Actually, it's not just chips, it's also for example, the United States has introduced measures restricting Chinese researchers in American universities, its access onto various kind of technologies, and in fact is scaring off quite a number of leading Chinese scientists. And then with the unwanted from the Americans' perspective, some of these leading scientists originally based in the United States are making a beeline back to Beijing, and they're bringing with them the technology and the kind of research and experience back to China. So I think that this is a conundrum the United States is facing. But there is no doubt that the two countries are pitching against one another for dominance, technology, geopolitics, trade, and so on.
Andrew, NVIDIA's CEO has warned the US is hurting its own companies with its economic policies. Do you see the Chinese officials, do you think, see this as a strategic advantage, or do they think that the US is bringing them down with them?
Well, I think if you look at Trump's no holds barred, American first bullying tactics against the whole world, in fact, results in a major erosion of Americans' moral leadership of the so-called rule-based order, throwing the rules, all the rules to the wind and replacing it by rules of the jungle. Dictated American first hegemony, and even a number of traditional allies, and they are trying to recalibrate the relationship, not just with China, but with the rest of the world, but also with China. I mean, particularly the European Union, and also, of course, the global South. So I think that this Trump's no holds barred kind of confrontation and restrictions on China, particularly throwing all the rules established under the American-led liberal order for decades has been counterproductive from Americans' perspective.
Yes.
It's really handing a lot of advantages to China.
Andrew KP Lang, thank you very much for joining us. Your insight is always valued. Thank you. We now move over to South Asia, where a suicide bombing struck an army school bus in Pakistan's restive Balochistan province today, killing 6 people, including at least 3 school children. The attack occurred in the Kuzdar district, where the bus was transporting around 40 students to a military school. Several children were also injured in the powerful blast. Pakistan's military and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif swiftly condemned the attack and accused Indian terror proxies of orchestrating the bombing, although they provided no evidence. Pakistan's military vowed to hunt down those responsible, calling the attack cowardly and Indian-sponsored. India's foreign ministry strongly rejected the allegations, accusing Pakistan of using India as a scapegoat to deflect from its own internal failings and reputation as a terrorism hub. Tensions between the 2 nuclear-armed nations remain high despite a ceasefire agreement reached on May the 10th after one of the worst escalations in years between the 2 powers. Both sides continue to blame each other for supporting militant activities, particularly in the disputed region of Kashmir. No group has claimed responsibility for today's bombing, but it follows a rising trend of violence in Balochistan. The attack invoked memories of the 2014 Peshawar school massacre. In March, the Baloch Liberation Army killed 31 people in a train hostage attack. We're once again joined by Cliff Smith, who's a national security and government affairs professional located in Washington. Thank you very much for joining us once again, Cliff. Obviously, this is a tragic terrorist attack that's happened here. What do you make of this attack on this school bus in the region of Balochistan, and what kind of message do you think the attackers are trying to send here?
I mean, there have been separatists in that region for a very long time. And so on some level, particularly when you have a distracted security force because of the competition with India over the terrorist attack in Kashmir and other international tensions, that they might see it an opportunity to take some sort of action. But as you noted, I mean, they didn't really present any evidence linking this to India. I mean, I wouldn't be completely shocked if India had stirred the pot in some ways and tried to help out opponents of the Pakistani government, but I would be beyond shocked if there was any evidence that actually linked India to this attack, which is just not the kind of thing India has ever historically done. So my guess is this is pretty much what it seems. It's separatists in the region, which are well known and very vocal, and a particularly extreme group taking a chance at action when other things are distracting their opponents. Maybe we could learn more. I could be wrong, but that's my initial take.
Yes, and obviously India has rejected these claims as Pakistan didn't provide any evidence. How do you view these rejections, and is this part of a wider blame game between these 2 nuclear rivals?
Sure. I mean, I would say Pakistan has used terrorism of this sort as and in support of proxy groups as a tool of its foreign policy for decades. And this is not seriously disputed by anybody that knows the region. And so, if anything, I would say that this is sort of, the worst possible the worst possible interpretation is that, Pakistan just simply lying. The best possible interpretation is that they are seeing in others what they know about themselves, which in this case I simply don't think is true. Again, you always want to wait for more facts to come out before you say anything definitive, but that would be my gut reaction to that.
Cliff, this ceasefire between India and Pakistan seems to be holding. How do you analyse the current state of the relations between the 2? And do you think this growing rest in Pakistan could spill over, especially in areas like Balochistan, which is where we saw this happen?
Sure, it could. I kind of tend to see a lot of this as more of the same, sadly. The Kashmir dispute is, older than my parents. And even the more recent blow-up, starting with the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits is only 30-something years old. So when you look at this kind of thing, it's really not a new dispute. It's just a tiny new chapter. And sure, it was a particularly bloody one and also a particularly horrifying one given the relative peace in the region from the Puama attack of 2019 until now. But really, we still have the same fundamental problem. We still have a Pakistani state that simply refuses to accept any Muslim majority region near its borders as being anything but theirs, just because of the nature of their nationalist identity, and an Indian government that thinks that it can take care of its minorities fairly. And if people want to see which one's right, I would just refer them to the demographics of India and Pakistan. Look at how many Pakistani Hindus there were at the founding of Pakistan and how many Indian Muslims they were, and look at how many there are today. As anybody that pays attention to this knows, Pakistani Hindus have diminished greatly to an almost infinitesimal amount, while Indian Muslims have stayed the same or even grown a bit.
Cliff, how do you see this situation developing? Obviously, the tensions are high now between the two nations. Just your final thoughts on this.
I think until the underlying sort of national identity issues get solved and Pakistan pays a real price for its continued aggression on Kashmir, we're going to see the same thing, sadly. Right now, we had a big blow up. Now we're seeing everybody panics because they're afraid of two nuclear powers facing off. Everything cools down because there's lots of pressure. It's not in anybody's interest to blow things up further. So given a few years, we'll repeat this again until something actually affects the underlying cause, which in my view is Pakistan's nationalistic identity that basically requires it to do this, and India's, which requires it to hold on to its own territory. You can tell which one I think is more legitimate, but I think until that dispute is settled in the minds of the Pakistani and Indian elites and those powers that be, and even in the narrative of the people, this will just continue in different forms. It'll rise and fall, but it'll continue.
Cliff Smith, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more international news updates. Thank you for joining us.